Hello, this is David White from Sportsman's Emporium. I'm going to talk a little bit today about fishing for trophy trout and big fish. You know, with trout season in full swing, everybody's out fishing, and you know, there's a lot of guys that are really starting to catch a lot of fish. It's getting really good. But you know, I think over time, a lot of us, you know, after catching a lot of trout, you want to learn how to catch the bigger trout. And sometimes that means sacrificing numbers to catch size of fish, you know, because there's more smaller trout and they're easier to fool a lot of the times. And sometimes the reason the bigger trout seem hard to catch is because the same flies and tactics don't necessarily work for them. You know, as a trout grows in a stream, especially brown trout, you know, they'll get big enough where they'll actually change their diet from eating mostly aquatic insects, and they'll switch that to eating mostly bait fish and crayfish, and they'll eat way less aquatic insects. So sometimes our typical fly fishing techniques don't really work on the big fish. So basically what you want to do to catch these big fish is, you know, fish with what they eat, which is primarily, I would say 80 to 90% of their diet is crayfish and minnows. So it really comes down to fly selection. I will say with the bigger flies and with the streamer flies and bait fish patterns, your little trout rod sometimes is a little too small. I would go with at least a 6-weight rod up to an 8-weight rod to throw big stuff. I think for around here, to throw basic streamers and smaller stuff, a 6-weight is perfect. So basically the leader size, you know, if you're using like a 6 or 7-weight rod to throw the streamers, and these days there's a lot of fly rods that are specifically made for streamer fishing, because this is actually getting popular all around the country. But in general, you know, if you're using a small regular fly rod chasing trout with bugs, you're probably throwing a 5 or a 6X leader in general, you know, which is really probably about 5 to 3 pound test. Pretty light. Now for the bigger stuff and the bigger fish, obviously you'll have to rig up a little heavier. I would recommend going with a 3X or a 4X leader. A 3X is the equivalent of an 8.2 pound test monofilament, and a 4X is a 6.4 pound, which is in general, you know, guys that are chasing bass and bigger trout use a 6 or 8 pound test when they're spin rods. So it'll be the same thing with the fly rod. You know, a 3 or 4X tippet or a leader with a 3 and 4X tippet will really be all you need to do to start into fly fishing with bigger stuff. Now some of the fly selection for these, you know, a lot of different streamer flies can work and a lot of different colors will work. Some of the basic colors to start with, I think, are really just minnow color and crayfish color. You have a lot of shiners, which are silver and white. Then you have your sculpins, which tend to be olive and brown, and of course your crayfish. Well, some of the smaller streamers that I like to fish are things like these little woolly buggers. Now this is a different kind of woolly bugger with dumbbell eyes on it, and I make that because it weights it down, gets it down to the bottom, and I can kind of jig it and flip it through the rocks and make it look like a crayfish. This works really good. Another really popular fly is the Clouser minnow. This is popular for all warm water fish as well as salt water, but it also works really good for big trout, especially big browns. You know, if you take one of these to a river like the North Branch of the Potomac, there's potential to get on some really good fish. This is just a little bunny leech pattern. These are really popular. This one has rubber legs on it just for making a little more vibration and movement in the water, and it has a rabbit strip on top, which is a really soft sort of pulsating fur in the water. Same thing with the dumbbell eyes. This is probably about 3 inches long, which is a pretty good size, but some flies for the really big fish can even get bigger. And on the large scale of some of these streamer flies, you can get into stuff like this, which is a very big, this is actually tied up for muskie, but I would also use this for brown trout. Really big browns in places that I know that they live would bite a fly like this. And this is a big bait fish pattern. I call it fire tiger colors, but it's really kind of perchy looking and just colorful and attractive, and a lot of warm water fish and the really big brown trout will eat these flies. So next time you're out, if you've caught some trout this year and you want to try something a little different, like I say, the action can be slower, but if you switch up your equipment a little bit and start throwing some bigger flies to these fish that act more like other fish, little minnows and crayfish, you will catch bigger fish.